So I've just got in from a whole day out on the bees, doing various things, different places, different times, and I just wanted to share with you. We've got a lovely bit of sunlight as the sun goes down at the end of the day, but also we've got a lot of frames I've just pulled out of hives. So these are my partitions that we use that have come out. Now they will go into storage now. And all these are frames of honey if I had to yank out the hives, because the hives are just so full of autumn honey and feed from last year. So I kind of wanted to just run through that with you as to why we've got so much feed in the hives this year and why it's important to identify that. And I talked about this before, and I thought that tomorrow, because I'm at an apiary that is so strong, we have got some strong apiaries and some weak apiaries, and we've got some winter losses, so it's all a mix. But this apiary I was at this afternoon, just finishing off, I actually run out of foundation to replace the amount of frames I'm taking out. So I thought, well, I'll stop here, come back, unload this lot, put all these into storage, and then I'll come back tomorrow with a fresh load of foundation, and I'll film what I'm doing with each colony, because it's so important for me here to identify that problem, that potential problem. So probably 60% of hives overall are all kind of where they should be this time of year, but they've still got a lot of honey that really is going to be surplus. So if you imagine, what generally happens is we come out of the winter, we have a few weeks of kind of warmish weather if we're lucky. The bees start to get going, the queen ups her laying since probably, we reckon, mid-January, and by the time you get to February, March, there's good brood patterns emerging. So that transition between old bees and new bees is kind of taking place. So there's lots of foragers in comparison to the size of the colony. It doesn't mean there's going to be a huge amount of foragers, but it just means that in comparison to the colony size, a large proportion of them are still foragers from the previous year. And you get that young explosion really about now when that brood starts to hatch. So there's a lot of nurse bees, which is brilliant for doing work in the colony, but my point of view is there isn't enough to manage the nectar flow that is pouring in through the door. So if you don't manage your frames properly in certain areas, I'm not saying this is the same for everybody, other people might have a slower build-up, which means you get a better configuration inside the colony because there's not so much nectar pouring through the door. The apiary up the road where I showed you those flowers last week, they've all been turned in now except one field. So a lot of my bees are in one area because it's the only field that hasn't been harrowed in by the farmer. But that apiary is absolutely booming. It's just unbelievable. It is a good spot anyway, but this year it's exceptional. The one I'm up the road today is exceptional as well. The one before was mediocre. I had about 4 winter losses out of the 15, but I've got spares, I've got plenty of nukes, so I'm going to restock everything where there's losses. And the other issue was that apiary is obviously too exposed because every year I'm losing bees there. And I lost those bees since probably early January, when we had another cooler spell but long windy spell, and I think that's the reason why. But anyway, put on that aside, tomorrow I'm going to go out and I'm going to film doing a bit of management with these colonies as I'm going through. Now, I'm probably about halfway through now. I can't work the hives Friday because, if I believe it or not, I've got some oil coming, so I'm counting my money to pay for that. And I'm also got an extractor coming for me, a 32 frame extractor being delivered in the afternoon, so I doubt I'll get much beekeeping done Friday. But the weather has been just exceptional this week. Absolutely incredible to have such a beautiful spell of calm, clear, a little bit cool at night, but in the day it's getting up to about 15 to 18 degrees, so absolutely ideal weather. I also wanted to show you some of these frames I brought back today as a classic example. Now this frame, I will try and dig these out because they're darn heavy, but this is exactly what you find, and I'll try and explain why you find this. So you see this here. This is what you've got to get out of your colonies. You see how thick that is, and see how warped it is. So what it was a colony that changed its queen, and then it went into the autumn, and they started putting in nectaring when I fed it and when the ivy flow started. But rather than just building every comb, I had a foundation in at the end because I'd made the summer split, and they just used this and kept building this out and out and out. And that's why you occasionally end up with something like that. So what you can do is you can shave this off with a knife. You can then keep the honey, or you can melt it down, or you could melt the whole frame down, to be honest, and then redo it again. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, and most of it is probably ivy honey. But it's just to point out, these are the frames I talked about last week that are choking up your hives. These are the frames that are stopping your queens laying, that are going to induce early swarming. And if you don't identify that, in 3 to 5 weeks' time, when the main flows hit, our flow will be in full flow in about 2 to 3 weeks. It'll last about 3 weeks, and then that'll be it. So come early May, it will finish. But the next, probably within the next 2 weeks, it'll really kick off. Our supers are probably going to go on next week, and then we'll have the full flow for 3 weeks. But if you don't identify this first, no matter how good your queens are, it will probably do that, because there's just no room in the brood nest. I mean, look at this. That's what I mean. I mean, I'm seeing frames like this all the time, you know. That's the kind of frame I'll dig out, because there's just nowhere else for the, you see with that one, there's just nowhere else for the queen to lay, but also nowhere else for them to put nectar. So you yank that out, and that is a fantastic frame to keep for feed later in the season. And look at it's all straight. Well, that side's a bit warped, actually. That's probably why I took that one out. But the majority are really straight and all really good. But this would be an outside comb. But this is the kind of thing we're getting. Lots of frames just full of honey everywhere, just absolutely packed. You see all that? But what I did find today, which was quite amusing, was this frame this was a partition. And the partition is what we put into our colony that we overwinter with. So you can see this one was made up of 3 bits of poly, and I hadn't painted it, but because I was short on partitions once, I just stuck it in the hive and let them get on with it. And sure enough, they've chewed it out, and they've actually made a lovely job of building drone comb. And you can actually see there's some drone larvae there. But I don't like taking this out, but you really have to, because I don't want to chew this anymore. You can actually see those larvae there. Don't know if you can focus on that, but there is actually larvae in those. Obviously the queen has laid drones into that, and but it's just a classic example of what can happen sometimes if you don't get to your colonies quick enough. But all these colonies I went through today, including this colony, didn't have any queen cells. They were just very full, so I pulled out a lot of this honey, and now I'm going to go and put it in my bottom shed and store it. And it's all sealed up, the bees can't get to it, and it's in the dark, and it's fairly cool. Now the question is, will wax moth get to this? I particularly like pollen, because it's the protein, obviously. But the answer to the question I just asked was, would these get eaten? By May, no, but you'll see a little bit of wax moth starting here and there. So if you want to spray with the treatment, Bacillus thuringiensis, you can buy it, and you just spray over the top of the frames, and usually they'll start somewhere near the top of the frame anyway, chewing. And that does the job, and the spores don't affect the bees whatsoever. I've used it for years, but honestly, I don't generally bother with the spring frames, because I get them back in the nukes and get them ready pretty quickly afterwards. All these frames I'm storing will be basically back in use by the end of May. But if you didn't treat them at all and you left them in the box, say you'll use them for summer splits, expect in literally a month after that, the wax moth will really get going, and they'll rip through stored honey and frames, and it'll just be a complete total mess. So my advice would be store it, but make sure you use it, or you get it out and have a look at it before June, because otherwise it will be a mess. But that is all really I'm going to say. Tomorrow I will film out some, as I said twice before, I will film some management going through these colonies and taking out, and how I decide what is a frame of honey and what isn't. The problem is, what I do is I will often move eggs. If there's a frame that's just been laid up, so there's a bit of honey, but there's eggs in the majority of the frame, I'll move the eggs one space up and put a frame of foundation in. Because eggs aren't critical to heat loss at this stage, and it's fairly warm. but I'll only do that if a colony has lots of bees. If a colony doesn't have lots of bees, but you still want to remove honey, just keep the brood nest the same. Don't affect the combination of your brood combs with your honey frames too much, because you want to make sure that that colony continues to get away and you don't get any brood dying out. It's very critical to identify what is a good colony and what isn't. You basically just have to have plenty of bees in that colony to do manipulation. I never ever split the brood nest with a frame of foundation until I know the nights are warm, because then you can be sure there's plenty of bees that will jump on that foundation and build it up, but it means the queen can lay in that straight away. And that's what I like to do, but there's only certain criteria you can do that. This time of year, you have to be so careful what you're doing. So anyway, until tomorrow, I'm off to put all this away and then get ready for tomorrow's load of hives. But I should get about 3 apiaries done tomorrow, or the other one finished and the next 2 done. So we're getting ahead, we're doing well. I just can't thank whatever it is up there that's giving us this beautiful weather. Isn't it absolutely glorious? We've got another 5 days of it at least. Anyway, long may it continue. Speak to you again soon. Bye-bye. Look at that sunset. Bye for now.